The Duke of Ravensmere knew something was wrong when no one came to welcome him. His carriage stopped beneath the stone arch of Ashcombe Manor shortly after noon, its wheels settling into a courtyard crowded with flowers, liveried servants, and polished carriages from half the county. A wedding was about to begin. Music drifted from the chapel. Guests in bright silks crossed the lawn. White ribbons moved gently in the wind. Yet not one servant approached the Duke's carriage. They all saw him. Several even stopped what they were doing. Then, one by one, they looked away. Duke Alistair Marwood remained seated for a moment, studying the manor through the glass. Ashcombe belonged to his son, Julian. Alistair had given him the estate upon his 25th birthday, though he had expected the gift to bring gratitude, obedience, and regular visits to Ravensmere Hall. Instead, Julian had gone silent. For 11 months, father and son had exchanged only formal letters. Then, 3 weeks earlier, a wedding invitation had arrived. No explanation, no request, only a card engraved with the name of the bride, Miss Eleanor Vale. Alistair knew no family called Vale. He had asked his secretary to investigate. No one could find her. There was no record of her presentation at court, no known estate, no family connection, no mention of her in society papers. It was as though Julian intended to marry a woman who had appeared from nowhere, and now the Duke had arrived to bless the marriage, only to be greeted as though he were the last man anyone wished to see. The carriage door opened at last. Not by a servant, by Julian himself. The groom wore a black coat, silver waistcoat, and an expression too calm to be welcoming. "You came," he said. Alistair stepped down. "You invited me. I was not certain that would be enough. You are my son." Julian closed the carriage door. "That has not always been enough either." The Duke ignored the remark. He looked toward the chapel where guests were entering beneath an arch of pale roses. "Where is the bride?" "Preparing." "And her family?" "She has none here." "None? No parents, no brothers, no cousins?" "None who would be welcomed." Alistair looked at him sharply. Julian turned away before the Duke could question him further. "There is something you should know before the ceremony," Julian said. "At last. My bride has asked that no one lift her veil until the vows are complete." The Duke gave a faint smile. "A bridal superstition?" "No." "Then why?" Julian looked toward the upper floor of the manor. One window stood open. Behind its white curtain, a figure appeared to be watching them. The curtain shifted. The figure was gone. "She believes that once her face is seen," Julian said, "someone may try to stop the marriage." Alistair followed his gaze. "Who?" Julian's expression hardened. "You." For the first time that day, the Duke was genuinely unsettled. He stepped closer. "Have we met?" Julian did not answer. A bell rang from the chapel. The first warning. 10 minutes until the ceremony. Julian began walking across the courtyard. Alistair caught his arm. "I asked whether I have met her. You may not remember. I remember everyone who matters." Julian looked down at his father's hand until the Duke released him. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly what she told me you would say." Then he walked away. Alistair remained where he was. A gust of wind carried the scent of roses across the courtyard. For one strange instant, the fragrance brought back another place. A narrow passage. A locked door. A woman's voice whispering from the dark. He pushed the memory away. It belonged to a winter 17 years earlier. A winter no one at Ravensmere was permitted to discuss. Inside the manor, servants moved with the same tense silence. The Duke entered through the western doors and found the great hall almost unrecognizable. Portraits had been removed from the walls. The Marwood family crest had been covered with white cloth. Even the enormous painting of Alistair's late wife, Duchess Marianne, was missing from its usual place above the staircase. In its place hung a small, unfamiliar portrait of a country lane beneath heavy rain. Alistair stopped before it. At the end of the painted lane stood a red door. Nothing else. No house, no walls, only a door standing in the rain. "It is an odd choice for a wedding," said a woman behind him. Alistair turned. Lady Beatrice Carraway stood at the foot of the staircase. She had been a close friend of his late wife and one of the few people in England who spoke to the Duke without fear. "You are late," she said. "I arrived before the vows. You arrived 17 years late." Alistair's face tightened. "What does that mean?" Beatrice approached the painting. "Do you recognize it?" "No. You should." She reached toward the frame, then stopped herself. Julian found it in a locked room beneath the old servants' wing. Alistair's eyes moved to her. "There is no room beneath that wing." Then someone went to great trouble to build a room that did not exist. The second chapel bell rang. 5 minutes. Guests hurried past the open doors. Beatrice lowered her voice. "Go home, Alistair. This is my son's wedding. That is precisely why you should leave. Who is Eleanor Vale?" Beatrice studied him for several seconds. "I do not know what name she was given after they took her away." The Duke's breath caught. "After who took her away?" But Beatrice had already turned. "Ask yourself why every portrait was removed." She walked toward the chapel without looking back. Alistair remained alone in the hall. The red door in the painting seemed suddenly familiar. He had seen one like it before, at Blackmere Lodge. The hunting house had stood on the edge of Ravensmere land, hidden behind pine trees and an overgrown wall. After Duchess Marianne died, Alistair ordered it sealed. No servant was permitted near it. No map showed the underground corridor leading from the lodge to the old servants' wing, and no one knew about the room at the end of that corridor. No one except Alistair, Marianne, and the woman who had begged him not to lock the door. The final bell rang. The Duke entered the chapel. Every pew was full. Heads turned as he walked down the aisle, but the silence did not feel respectful. It felt expectant. Julian stood at the altar beside the clergyman. Behind him, 3 chairs remained empty. One for the groom's mother, one for the bride's mother, and one with no name. Alistair took his place in the front pew. Lady Beatrice sat several seats away. She would not meet his eyes. The chapel doors closed. The organ began. When the bride appeared, the guests rose. She wore a pale ivory gown with long sleeves and no jewellery. A thick veil covered her face from the crown of her head to her waist. She did not carry flowers. In both hands, she held a small wooden box. Alistair stared at it. Dark walnut, brass corners, a crescent-shaped mark carved into the lid. He knew that box. He had placed it inside the locked room at Blackmere Lodge 17 years ago. The bride walked slowly down the aisle. She did not look left or right, but as she passed the Duke, she stopped. Only for a second. The veil turned toward him. Alistair felt the unmistakable weight of her gaze. Then she continued to the altar. Julian took her hand. The bride gave him the wooden box. He placed it beside the prayer book. The clergyman began. "Dearly beloved." The Duke heard none of the opening words. His attention remained fixed upon the box. Inside it had been 3 letters, a silver pendant, and a confession written in his wife's hand. The confession had disappeared before Marianne's death. Alistair had believed she destroyed it. Now it sat on the altar at his son's wedding. The clergyman asked the bride and groom to join hands. Julian faced the veiled woman. "Eleanor Vale," he said, "do you come here freely?" "I do." Her voice was soft, but Alistair knew it, not because he had heard it recently, because he had spent 17 years trying to forget it. The chapel seemed to narrow around him. He saw again the locked room. The red door. A frightened young woman standing beside Marianne. Rain running from her hair. Bloodless hands clutching a newborn child. Alistair gripped the edge of the pew. Impossible. The woman from that night would now be older than this bride, yet the voice was the same, not identical, inherited. The clergyman continued. "Lord Julian Marwood, do you take this woman?" "I do." The answer came without hesitation. The bride's hands trembled beneath the groom's. Alistair stood. A murmur moved through the chapel. Julian looked at him. The clergyman stopped speaking. Alistair's voice came out harsher than intended. "Before this continues, I demand to know who she is." Julian remained calm. "You were invited to bless the marriage. I will bless no marriage built upon concealment." The bride lowered her head. Julian stepped between her and the Duke. "You taught me concealment can preserve a family. Do not speak in riddles. I learned them from you." Alistair pointed toward the wooden box. "That belongs to Ravensmere." "No," the bride said. Every face turned toward her. She lifted her head. "It belonged to my mother." The Duke stared at the veil. "Who was your mother?" The bride did not answer. Julian did. Her name was Clara Bell. The Duke went still. A woman gasped somewhere behind him. Lady Beatrice closed her eyes. Clara Bell. The young seamstress, Duchess Marianne, had brought into Ravensmere during the winter of 1809. The woman who had disappeared after a scandal no servant was allowed to name. The woman Alistair claimed had stolen from the Duchess and fled. It had been a lie. Clara had not fled. She had been sent away. And before she left, she had seen something inside the locked room that could have ended the Marwood name. Alistair stepped into the aisle. Clara Bell had no daughter. The bride's hidden face turned toward him. "She did. I would have known. You did know." The words struck harder than a shout. Julian looked from the bride to his father. "Lift the veil," Alistair ordered. The groom did not move. "Julian, you told me she might say that," Julian murmured to the bride. She squeezed his hand once. Then she released him. "It is time." Julian reached for the veil. A sudden knock sounded from beneath the chapel floor. 3 slow knocks. The guests froze. Alistair's face drained of colour. He knew that sound. The same signal had been used at Blackmere Lodge whenever someone approached the hidden corridor. 3 knocks meant, someone is listening. Julian glanced toward the altar steps. The bride whispered, "Do not stop." He lifted the veil. The woman beneath it appeared no older than 24. Her dark hair was gathered simply at the back of her head. Her complexion was pale, and one small scar curved beside her mouth. But it was her eyes that forced the Duke backward. Grey, almost silver. The exact colour of Duchess Marianne's eyes. The bride looked like Clara Bell. She also looked like Alistair's late wife. And around her neck hung the silver pendant that Marianne had worn on the night she died. Alistair's voice failed him. The bride opened the pendant. Inside rested a miniature portrait. Not of Clara. Not of Marianne. Of Alistair himself, painted when he was 30. The bride faced him. "My name is not Eleanor Vale," she said. The chapel became utterly silent. "My name is Mercy Bell." Alistair stared at her. Mercy. The name Marianne had written beside the drawing of an infant in her private journal. The child, Alistair had been told, did not survive the winter. He turned toward Julian. "You knew." "I knew enough to bring her here." "You cannot marry her." "Why?" The Duke could not answer. Mercy watched him closely. "Tell him," she said. Alistair looked around the chapel, at the servants who would not welcome him, at the guests who had come not merely to witness a wedding, but to witness his reaction, at Lady Beatrice, who had clearly known more than she admitted, then at the empty chair beside the altar. The unnamed chair. A door opened behind the clergyman. An elderly woman entered from the vestry, leaning upon a cane. Alistair recognized her immediately. Mrs. Fenwick had once served as Duchess Marianne's personal maid. He had been told she died 10 years ago. She walked to the empty chair and sat. "You should speak now, Your Grace," she said, "before someone else speaks for you." The wooden box clicked open by itself. A folded letter lay on top. Julian picked it up. The writing on the outside was faded but clear. "To my son, when he is old enough to learn why his mother died." Julian stared at the handwriting. Mother wrote this. Alistair stepped toward him. "Give it to me." Julian pulled it away. Mercy placed herself between them. The Duke stopped. Again, the 3 knocks sounded beneath the floor. This time, they were followed by a woman's voice. Faint, muffled, but unmistakable. "Do not believe him." The guests erupted in whispers. Julian looked toward the floor. Mercy looked at the Duke. Alistair could not move, because the voice beneath the chapel belonged to Clara Bell, the woman everyone believed had died 17 years ago, and she had just spoken from inside the hidden passage. The bride turned to the groom. "Now you understand why I insisted upon marrying here." Julian stared at her. "You knew she was alive." Mercy looked toward the altar floor. "I knew she was somewhere on this estate." Then she faced Duke Alistair. "And I knew he would lead us to her the moment he recognized me." Before we continue, please subscribe to Nightfall Tales and like this video, as your support encourages us to keep creating quality content filled with mystery, emotion, and unforgettable twists. For several seconds after Clara Bell's voice rose from beneath the chapel floor, no one moved. The wedding guests remained frozen in their pews. Mercy stood beside the altar with her veil hanging behind her shoulders, her face pale but determined. Julian still held the letter written by his mother. Duke Alistair stared at the stone floor as though something long buried had finally spoken his name. Then the voice came again. "Mercy, do not let him take the letter." The Duke moved first. He reached for Julian. Julian stepped back. "You heard her," Mercy said. Alistair's gaze snapped toward her. "You do not understand what is beneath this chapel. Then explain it." "This is neither the time nor the place." Mercy looked around at the gathered nobility, servants, tenants, and magistrates. "That is why you chose locked rooms, is it not? Because you could always decide when and where the truth was permitted to exist." The Duke's jaw tightened. The 3 knocks sounded once more. Mrs. Fenwick rose from the unnamed chair. Her cane struck the floor with a sharp crack. A section of its ivory handle came loose. Inside was a long iron key. Alistair stared at it. "You kept that?" "I kept everything your wife asked me to keep." Mrs. Fenwick crossed the altar and knelt beside the first step. Her old hands moved over the carved stone until her fingers found a narrow opening concealed inside the pattern. She inserted the key. A lock turned beneath the floor. The sound was soft, but it silenced every whisper in the chapel. Mrs. Fenwick stood. "Lord Julian, lift the kneeling cushion." Julian moved the embroidered cushion aside. Beneath it was a brass ring. He pulled. A square section of the floor rose slowly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Cold air entered the chapel. It carried the smell of damp stone and lavender. The Duke closed his eyes. Clara had always worn lavender water. Julian took a candle from the altar. "I am going down." "No," Alistair said. His son looked at him. "Is that an order?" "It is a warning. The passage has not been maintained in years. Someone beneath us appears to have maintained it well enough." Mercy stepped toward the opening. Julian caught her hand. "You should remain here. She came for me." "Mercy. She has been hidden for most of my life. I will not ask her to wait in the dark while men decide what I am permitted to know." Without another word, she took the candle from Julian and descended. Julian followed. Mrs. Fenwick went behind him. The Duke remained at the opening. Lady Beatrice watched him from the front pew. "Are you not going?" she asked. Alistair looked at her. For the first time, Beatrice appeared frightened. Not surprised, frightened. "You knew she was beneath the chapel," the Duke said. "I knew she had returned." "When?" Beatrice glanced toward the open passage. "Long enough to prepare for today." "You helped her." "I helped your son." Alistair stepped closer. "Those are not always the same thing." Before Beatrice could answer, a cry echoed from below. "Julian!" It was Mercy's voice. The Duke descended immediately. The staircase led into a narrow tunnel lined with old bricks. Water glistened between the stones, and small lamps had been placed at intervals along the wall. Someone had used the passage recently. At the end stood a red door. The same red door shown in the painting inside Ashcombe Manor. Julian stood before it with one hand pressed against the wood. "It is locked." Mrs. Fenwick tried the iron key. It did not turn. Mercy placed her ear against the door. "Mother?" No answer came. "Clara!" Silence. Julian struck the door with his palm. "Mrs. Bell, step away from it." Alistair approached from behind them. "That will not open it." Mercy turned. "You know how." The Duke reached toward the wall and pressed one of the bricks. Nothing happened. He pressed another. A hidden latch released. The red door opened inward. The room beyond was empty. A chair stood in its center. Beside it was a cup of tea that still released a thin trail of steam. A grey shawl rested over the back of the chair. But there was no Clara. Mercy rushed inside. "Mother!" Julian examined the walls. "There must be another entrance." "There are 3, Alistair said. Everyone turned toward him. The Duke entered slowly. The first leads to the servants' wing. The second passes beneath the eastern gardens. The third leads to Blackmere Lodge, Mrs. Fenwick finished. Mercy looked at the cup. "She was here. She wanted us to believe she was here," Alistair replied. Mercy faced him angrily. "I heard her voice." "As did I." "Then where is she?" Alistair looked toward a small brass pipe protruding from the wall. A speaking tube. Julian placed his hand over its opening. The voice may have come from anywhere along the passage. Mercy's confidence faltered. The Duke watched her carefully. "Clara is skilled at making people search in the wrong direction." Mrs. Fenwick stepped between them. "And you are skilled at describing your own faults as someone else's." She pulled the grey shawl from the chair. A folded paper fell from beneath it. Mercy picked it up. Only 4 words were written there. "Ask him about Marianne." Mercy looked at the Duke. Alistair's expression changed. Julian noticed. "What about my mother?" The Duke did not answer. Julian held up Marianne's sealed letter. "She wrote this for me. Did you know?" No. Did you know Clara was still alive? Alistair walked to the far wall. I suspected. For 17 years? For the last 6 months. Mercy stared at him. Why? Because documents began disappearing from Ravensmere. What documents? Property records, birth registers, letters written by my wife. He turned toward them. Someone wanted Julian to discover this room. And you did nothing? Julian asked. I watched. You watched me prepare to marry a woman whose identity you knew. I did not know who Mercy was until her veil was lifted. Mercy touched the scar beside her mouth. But you recognized me. I recognized the scar. Her hand fell. Alistair looked away. You were an infant when I last saw you. The room became silent. Mercy spoke carefully. You said my mother had no daughter. She was not supposed to keep you. Why? The Duke did not respond. Mrs. Fenwick answered for him. Because Mercy was born at Ashcombe. Julian looked at her. What difference would that make? Every difference. Mrs. Fenwick sat in the chair Clara had left. Before your grandmother married the old Duke of Ravensmere, she had a daughter with a schoolmaster. That daughter was Clara Bell. Mercy stared at her. My mother was related to Duchess Marianne. Half-sisters, Mrs. Fenwick said. Clara was the elder. Julian looked toward the Duke. Then Mercy and I are first cousins, Alistair said. Mercy and Julian looked at each other. The revelation changed the room, but neither released the other's hand. Mrs. Fenwick continued. Ashcombe did not originally belong to the Marwood family. It came through the Duchess's mother. The estate was to pass to her eldest daughter and that daughter's descendants. Clara, Mercy whispered. The old woman nodded. But Clara's existence had been concealed. When Marianne was born within marriage, the family treated her as the only daughter. Julian's face hardened. You gave me an estate that belonged to Mercy. I gave you an estate the law recognized as mine. The law recognized a lie. The law recognizes documents, the Duke replied, not whispered family stories. Mercy held up her mother's note. Then why did you send me away? Alistair looked toward the speaking tube. Because Marianne discovered the truth. The Duke's voice lost some of its authority. She found Clara. She brought her to Ravensmere. She intended to present her before the trustees and restore Ashcombe to her. Yet that never happened, Julian said. No, because you locked Clara in this room. Alistair remained silent. Julian stepped closer. Answer me. Yes. The word echoed against the stone. Mercy pulled her hand from Julian's. You imprisoned my mother. For 3 nights. You sent me away from her. I sent you to a respectable family. You told her I was dead. Alistair's eyes closed briefly. That was not my decision. Mercy stared at him. Whose decision was it? A voice came through the brass speaking tube. Mine. Everyone turned. The voice was clear. Female. But it was not Clara's. It was Lady Beatrice's. Julian leaned toward the tube. Lady Beatrice. Her reply came from somewhere along the hidden passage. Bring Marianne's letter to the glass gallery. Clara is waiting. The tube went silent. Alistair moved toward the door. No one leaves this room. Mercy blocked him. You do not command us. You have been brought here to believe a carefully prepared story. Julian held up the letter. Then let us read Mother's words. You do not know what is inside it. That is why I intend to open it. Alistair grabbed his son's wrist. Not here. Julian tore himself free. You have had 17 years to choose the place. He broke the seal. Inside were 6 pages covered in Duchess Marianne's handwriting. Julian began reading. My dearest son, if this letter has reached you, then silence has failed to protect what love was too weak to confess. Alistair stepped back as though struck. Julian continued. Clara Bell is my sister. Ashcombe belongs to her, though our mother allowed the world to believe otherwise. When Clara came to me, I promised to repair the wrong. Mercy's eyes filled, but she remained still. Julian turned the page. On the evening before the trustees were to meet, I became afraid. If Clara's identity were accepted, your future would change. Ashcombe would no longer be yours. Your father offered to delay the meeting until I recovered my courage. Julian lowered the letter. You said Mother wanted to restore Clara. She did, Alistair replied. Then she changed her mind. She was frightened for you. Julian looked back at the page. She writes that you offered to delay the meeting. She does not say she asked you to imprison Clara. Alistair said nothing. Julian continued. I permitted your father to confine my sister for one night. That is the shame I carried until my death. But by morning, Clara's child was gone. Your father claimed Lady Beatrice had arranged the removal without his consent. Mercy turned toward the speaking tube. Lady Beatrice took me. Mrs. Fenwick slowly rose. I was told the Duke ordered it. Alistair shook his head. I ordered Clara confined. I did not order the child removed. Mercy's anger did not soften. You created the room in which it became possible. Yes. The honesty silenced her. Julian turned to the next page. It was blank. He checked the remaining sheets. All blank. The confession ends there. Mrs. Fenwick examined the pages. One is missing. Alistair looked toward the empty chair. Clara. Mercy shook her head. My mother would not steal the final page. She stole the entire box once before. To prevent you from destroying it, a distant door slammed somewhere inside the passage. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps. Julian ran into the corridor. Lady Beatrice! The others followed. At the first turning, they found Clara's grey shawl lying on the stones. Beneath it was the missing page. Julian lifted it. A fresh line had been written beneath Marianne's faded words. Do not bring the Duke to the gallery. He is not the man Lady Beatrice fears. Julian looked up. Then who is? A scream came through the speaking tube. Not a scream of pain, a cry of shock. Lady Beatrice's voice followed. You were supposed to be dead. Then the passage went silent. Alistair seized a lamp. This way. He led them through a narrow arch and up a twisting staircase. They emerged inside Ashcombe's glass gallery. Sunlight poured through tall windows. Wedding flowers had been arranged along the walls, but the room was deserted. One set of doors stood open to the gardens. Lady Beatrice was gone. Clara was gone. On a table in the centre of the gallery lay the wooden box from the chapel. Julian approached it carefully. Inside was the silver pendant, Marianne's letters, and a small book containing the original Ashcombe family records. One object was missing, the legal deed proving Clara's claim. Mercy searched the room. She brought us here to steal it. No, the Duke said. He was staring at the open garden doors. She brought all of you here to keep you away from the chapel. The wedding bells suddenly began ringing, not in celebration, in warning. They rushed to the windows. A carriage was racing down the long drive. Lady Beatrice sat inside. Beside her was an elderly woman wearing Clara's grey shawl. Mercy pressed both hands against the glass. Mother! The carriage did not stop. Julian turned toward his father. Where are they going? Alistair looked toward the distant road. To Ravensmere. Why? Because beneath my library is the only document more powerful than the Ashcombe deed. Mercy faced him. What document? The Duke's expression became grim. The written confession of the person who truly kept Clara imprisoned. You confessed already, Julian said. I locked the first door. Alistair looked at the disappearing carriage. But someone else locked the second. Mrs. Fenwick gripped her cane. Who? The Duke looked directly at Julian. Your mother. Julian stared at him. You are lying. I spent 17 years allowing the world to blame me because Marianne was dying, and I would not let her son remember her as a woman who betrayed her own sister. Julian held the unfinished letter in his trembling hands. Then why did she write this confession? Because she told only half the truth. Alistair pointed toward the carriage. And Lady Beatrice has taken Clara to retrieve the page that reveals the rest. Mercy looked from the Duke to Julian. The wedding guests were still waiting in the chapel. The vows were unfinished. The estate deed had been stolen, and Clara Bell had willingly entered a carriage with the very woman accused of taking her child 17 years earlier. Then Mercy noticed something inside the wooden box. A second wedding ring, older than Julian's, engraved with Clara's initials. She lifted it. Alistair's face changed immediately. Mercy looked inside the band and read the name engraved beside her mother's. Not Marwood, not Bell, Beatrice Carraway. Lady Beatrice had not merely helped Clara escape. She had once made a private vow to her, and whatever had happened in the locked room had begun long before Duke Alistair entered it. Here is today's controversial question. Was Duke Alistair right to protect his dying wife's reputation for 17 years, or should he have exposed her actions immediately, even if the truth destroyed his son's memory of his mother? Tell us your answer in the comments below. We want to know who you believe carries the greater guilt, the Duke who locked the first door, or the Duchess who may have locked the second. The carriage carrying Clara Bell and Lady Beatrice reached Ravensmere before sunset. Duke Alistair's party arrived only minutes behind it. By then, the great front doors were standing open. No servants waited in the entrance hall. No lamps had been lit. The house appeared abandoned, although a trail of damp footprints crossed the marble floor and disappeared toward the library. Mercy followed them without waiting for the others. "Mother!" Her voice travelled through the silent corridors. No answer came. Julian caught up with her beside the library doors. Do not enter alone. She has been alone for 17 years. And someone brought her here for a reason. Mercy pushed open the doors. The library was empty. Books covered 3 walls from floor to ceiling. Heavy curtains blocked the evening light. Above the fireplace hung the only portrait Duke Alistair had never removed from Ravensmere, Duchess Marianne. She appeared young, composed and almost kind. Mercy stared at the painted woman. "My aunt," she whispered. Julian stood beside her. "My mother." Neither knew whether to mourn her or condemn her. Alistair entered with Mrs. Fenwick behind him. He crossed to the Duke's desk, opened its lowest drawer, and removed a brass key. "The confession is beneath this room." Julian gave a bitter laugh. "Another hidden chamber. Your grandfather built Ravensmere during a period when noble families trusted walls more than people, and you continued the tradition." Alistair did not deny it. He moved to Marianne's portrait. Behind the frame was a narrow keyhole. He inserted the brass key. A mechanism turned inside the wall, and one section of the bookcase opened. Stone steps descended beneath the house. Mercy looked at the Duke. "Is this where you kept the document?" "Yes." "Then why has Lady Beatrice not already taken it?" Alistair glanced toward the untouched dust on the stairs. "She may not know how to open the entrance." A voice came from the darkness below. "I did not need to." Lady Beatrice appeared at the bottom of the steps. She held a lamp in one hand and a folded document in the other. Clara stood behind her. Mercy stopped breathing. Her mother was smaller than she remembered. 17 years had silvered Clara's dark hair and sharpened the lines around her eyes, but Mercy knew her instantly. She knew the way Clara held one shoulder slightly higher than the other. She knew the gentle tilt of her head. Memories returned in fragments. A cottage window, a lullaby, hands sewing a blue ribbon onto a child's dress. Then a winter morning when Clara had vanished. Mercy descended one step. "Mother?" Clara looked up. All the strength left her face. "My little bird." Mercy ran down the staircase. They met halfway. For several moments neither spoke. Mercy clung to the woman she had been told was dead, while Clara held her as though trying to recover every lost year at once. Julian turned away to give them privacy. Alistair did not. Clara saw him over Mercy's shoulder. Her expression changed. "You came. You designed the wedding to ensure that I would." "I designed nothing," Clara said. Lady Beatrice lifted the document. "That was my work." Julian descended into the chamber. "You arranged the wedding. I arranged the invitation, the witnesses, and the discovery of the wooden box." Mercy released her mother. "You made me believe Julian wished to marry me." Julian looked at Beatrice. "She made me believe the same of you." Silence settled over the steps. Mercy stared at Julian. "You did not propose the meeting at Ashcombe." "No, I received letters bearing your signature." "I received letters bearing yours." Lady Beatrice showed no remorse. "You both needed to arrive at the altar willingly." "You deceived us," Julian said. "I brought two people robbed by the same secret into the only room where England's most influential witnesses would gather voluntarily." "The chapel," Mercy whispered. Beatrice nodded. The guests were not invited merely to attend a wedding. Among them were the Ashcombe trustees, 2 magistrates, a bishop's representative, and every family whose testimony could prevent the truth from being buried again. Clara looked at her sharply. "You promised there would be no vows." "There were no completed vows. The clergyman never pronounced them married." Julian touched the unfinished ring on his finger. "So the wedding was a hearing disguised as a ceremony. A hearing Alistair could not postpone." The Duke descended the final steps. "And what judgment did you hope to obtain?" Beatrice held out the folded document. The one Marianne denied Clara. The chamber beneath the library was round and windowless. At its centre stood a table bearing an old ledger, several sealed letters, and a small portrait of 2 young women, Marianne and Clara. They stood side by side beneath an apple tree, smiling as though no inheritance had ever divided them. Mercy approached the picture. "My mother kept this." "No," Clara said. "Marianne did." Julian looked at her. "You came here willingly with Lady Beatrice." "Yes." "Why did you hide in the passage instead of appearing at the wedding?" Clara's gaze moved toward Alistair. "Because I needed to know what he would confess when he believed I was listening but could not answer." The Duke absorbed the accusation. "You tested me. You tested the world with my silence. For 17 years. Clara faced everyone. The truth did not begin with Alistair locking me inside the room at Blackmere. It began when Marianne discovered that I was our mother's first daughter. Her eyes moved to the portrait. At first she welcomed me. She called me sister. She promised Ashcombe would be returned. Then she changed her mind because of Julian, Alistair said. Clara shook her head. "No, that is what she wanted you to believe." Julian went still. What changed her mind? Clara looked directly at him. "Your birth. I know." "You do not." She crossed to the old ledger and opened it. Between 2 pages lay a physician's record. Julian read the first line. Then he read it again. His face emptied of colour. Alistair reached for the paper. Julian pulled it away. "What does it say?" Mercy asked. Julian could barely form the words. "It says Duchess Marianne gave birth to a daughter." The Duke stared at him. "That is impossible. It bears the physician's signature," Clara continued quietly. "The child lived for only 2 days." Julian looked up. "Then who am I?" No one answered. The chamber seemed to contract around him. Alistair gripped the edge of the table. "Marianne gave birth to you at Ravensmere." "She did not," Clara said. "I did." Mercy stepped backward. Julian stared at Clara. "What?" Clara's voice trembled, but she did not look away. "You are my son." The words destroyed every explanation the family had carried into the room. Mercy covered her mouth. Julian looked from Clara to Mercy. "My sister." "Yes," Clara whispered. The wedding had never placed 2 cousins at the altar. It had placed a brother and sister there. Lady Beatrice had stopped the ceremony before it could be completed, but the horror of how close they had come remained in Julian's face. Alistair approached Clara. "You told me your child was a girl. I told you nothing." "Marianne did." The Duke looked toward the physician's record. Clara explained. "When Marianne's daughter died, she feared her marriage would collapse. You needed an heir. She needed to remain Duchess of Ravensmere. I had just given birth to Julian at Ashcombe." "Who was his father?" Julian asked. Clara's eyes filled. "A schoolmaster named Elias Vale. He died before you were born." Vale, the false surname given to Mercy. A name chosen not to conceal her completely, but to leave a trail. Clara continued. "Marianne begged me to let her present you as her child. She promised you would have everything I could never give you." Julian's voice hardened. "And you agreed?" "For 1 year. 1 year. She swore that once her place at Ravensmere was secure, she would acknowledge me and restore Ashcombe. I believed her, but she kept me. Yes." And later, when Mercy was born, Marianne understood that Mercy's existence could reveal everything. 2 children with the same mother, one raised as an heir, the other hidden. Alistair's expression changed as the full truth emerged. That was why she ordered Mercy taken. Clara looked at Lady Beatrice. Beatrice did not steal Mercy. She saved her. Mercy touched the old ring she had found. The inscription. Clara took it gently from her. "Beatrice and I made a promise as girls. If either of us ever became powerless, the other would protect her child. The rings were the sign of that promise." Beatrice's composure finally cracked. "I took Mercy to a family beyond Ravensmere. Marianne believed the child had died. It was the only lie that kept her from searching." Julian sank into a chair. All his life, he had believed himself the Duke's son and Marianne's only child. Now he possessed neither claim. Alistair stood before him. "You are still my son." Julian gave a broken laugh. "By what measure?" "By every day I raised you. You sent me to school at 7. I visited every month. You criticized every choice I made, because I expected you to inherit everything I had. You suspected none of this." Alistair looked toward Marianne's portrait. "I suspected she had concealed something about your birth. I never suspected you were Clara's child." Clara placed the final confession on the table. Marianne wrote the truth before she died. Then she divided it into 2 parts. She gave one to Beatrice and hid the other beneath this library. Julian unfolded the document. The final lines were in his mother's hand. "Julian is Clara's son. I kept him because I feared losing my husband, my title and my place. I confined my sister when she demanded him back. Alistair opened the first door after 3 nights, but I had already ordered the passage sealed." The guilt is mine. Julian stopped reading. The room remained silent. At last, Alistair spoke. Why did you allow me to believe Clara had abandoned both children? Marianne's confession answered from the page. I told my husband that Clara fled after attempting to steal the boy. He believed me because the truth would have required him to admit his household had been built upon deception. Alistair lowered his head. Clara watched him. She knew you well. Yes. The Duke did not defend himself. He removed the Ravensmere signet ring from his finger and placed it beside the confession. What happens now? Lady Beatrice opened the Ashcombe deed. Clara's identity will be entered into the estate records. Ashcombe passes to her, and after her, equally to both her children. Julian looked at Mercy. I have lived on what belonged to you. Mercy shook her head. What was stolen from our mother does not have to divide us. Clara reached for both their hands. It divided us before either of you could speak. It will not divide you now. Alistair looked at Julian. Ravensmere remains yours. No. Julian stood. I will not inherit another house through a lie. You are my legal heir. I am not your blood. Blood is the least impressive thing a father gives his son. Julian studied him. It was the first honest sentence he had ever heard the Duke speak. Alistair continued. I failed Clara. I believed Marianne because questioning her would have endangered the life I preferred. I cannot undo that, but I will not permit my cowardice to take your home from you as well. Julian glanced at Clara. She nodded. Keep Ravensmere, she said, but change what it means. Months later, Ashcombe Chapel opened again. There was no hidden bride, no unfinished ceremony. Clara Bell stood before the trustees and publicly received the estate that had been denied to her. Mercy became its steward, reopening the cottages and school that had been neglected under distant management. Julian remained at Ravensmere, but he removed every locked door from the servants' wing and opened the family records to anyone whose history had been concealed. Lady Beatrice placed Marianne's full confession in the county archive, where no duke could destroy it. As for Alistair, he did not lose his title. He lost something far more precious to him, the right to control the story. Yet he returned to Ashcombe 1 year later, not as its master, but as a guest. Clara met him beneath the apple tree shown in the old portrait. I have no blessing to ask from you, she said. I know. Why did you come? Alistair looked toward the house where Julian and Mercy stood together, not as bride and groom, but as brother and sister finally learning the shape of their stolen family. I came to see whether there was anything left that I could repair. Clara regarded him for a long moment. Then she handed him a rusted key. The red door at Blackmere still stands. He closed his fingers around it. What would you have me do? Remove it. The Duke did. And when the door was carried out into the daylight, no one kept the key, because the darkest secret at Ravensmere had survived for 17 years, not because the room was hidden, but because too many people benefited from leaving it closed.